Few names carry as much weight in Hollywood history as Clint Eastwood. Over the decades, he transformed himself from a handsome television cowboy into the stone-faced icon of the spaghetti western, then reinvented himself again as an Academy Award-winning director. His career became the kind most actors could only dream about. Yet behind the fame, the awards, and that famously controlled public image was a private life filled with secrets, complicated relationships, and betrayals that rarely made it onto the screen. And no chapter was more explosive than his relationship with actress Sondra Locke. Their romance would eventually collapse into one of Hollywood's ugliest breakups. When Locke discovered what she believed Eastwood had been hiding from her, she took him to court. A settlement followed, but according to Locke, the worst betrayal had not even happened yet. Clint Eastwood was born in San Francisco in 1931, during the difficult years of the Great Depression. Over the years, stories about his childhood often emphasized hardship and uncertainty, painting a picture of a young Eastwood growing up during one of America's most difficult economic periods. Sondra Locke, however, later challenged that version of events. She claimed Clint's childhood was considerably more comfortable than the legend suggested. His family reportedly lived in prosperous neighborhoods, had access to a swimming pool, and belonged to a country club. It was an early example of something that would follow Eastwood throughout his life, the difference between the public story and what people closest to him claimed was happening behind the scenes. That mystery only deepened as Eastwood became famous. Despite spending more than 6 decades in the public eye, parts of his early life remain surprisingly unclear. Eastwood has always been careful about what he reveals, especially when it comes to his private affairs. Even something as simple as whether he officially graduated from high school has generated conflicting accounts. People who knew him when he was young remembered a teenager who seemed far more interested in girls, cars, and having a good time than sitting inside a classroom. Whatever happened academically, Eastwood would soon discover that conventional credentials were not going to determine his future. His entry into Hollywood sounds almost too convenient to be true. While Eastwood was stationed at Fort Ord in California, a film crew arrived to shoot on the military base. A cameraman reportedly noticed the tall, striking young serviceman and thought he had the kind of face Hollywood might be able to use. That chance observation eventually put Eastwood in contact with director Arthur Lubin. Lubin immediately recognized Eastwood's physical presence. He was tall, handsome, and looked like someone who belonged on a movie poster. There was only one problem: once Eastwood actually started acting, the illusion began to fall apart. His early audition hardly suggested that a future Hollywood legend had just entered the room. Lubin reportedly believed Eastwood needed serious acting lessons. He looked good on camera, but he was stiff, inexperienced, and had little idea how to perform naturally in front of one. For most aspiring actors, that might have been the end of the story. Eastwood somehow walked away with something far better than rejection. Despite his obvious weaknesses, Lubin helped him secure a contract with Universal, earning roughly $100 a week. It was a remarkable stroke of luck. One moment Eastwood was essentially an unknown young man with no major acting experience. The next, a Hollywood director had spotted him, opened a door, and given him a chance inside the movie business. But getting through the studio gates and becoming a star were two very different things. Eastwood was about to learn that his appearance could get him noticed, but it could not guarantee him a career. His first attempts at landing substantial roles went badly. Eastwood auditioned for 6 Bridges to Cross, only to be rejected. He tried for other productions, including Brigadoon, The Constant Nymph, and The 7-Year Itch, but the results were largely the same. Hollywood casting directors saw the handsome face, but they did not yet see a convincing actor. One of his more memorable early assignments at Universal was hardly the glamorous breakthrough he might have imagined. Eastwood ended up playing the Scarecrow in a Christmas musical performed for the children of studio employees. For another aspiring star, repeated rejection might have been enough to send him home. Eastwood kept going. He understood something important: looking like a movie star was not the same thing as being able to act like one. He continued studying, worked on his delivery, and gradually became more comfortable in front of the camera. His natural reserve, once seen as a weakness, slowly became part of his appeal. Instead of trying to become a highly theatrical performer, Eastwood began discovering the power of doing less. One acting exercise may have helped reveal where his greatest strength was hiding. During an improvised scene with a young female student, Eastwood reportedly tapped into such convincing anger that his performance left her shaken and in tears. Suddenly, the quiet young actor had found something powerful. He might not have been the most expressive performer in the room, but when Clint Eastwood became angry, people believed him. That quality would eventually become one of the foundations of his screen persona. The narrowed eyes, the restrained voice, the feeling that violence might erupt without warning, those traits would later define some of the most famous characters of his career. But before Dirty Harry, before The Men with No Name, and before the Oscars, Eastwood needed the role that would make people recognize his face. That role arrived with the television western Rawhide. Eastwood was cast as Rowdy Yates, a young cowboy who was a long way from the hardened gunslingers he would later become famous for playing. The character was youthful, impulsive, and far less intimidating than the Eastwood audiences would eventually know. Still, Rawhide changed his life. The series brought him into millions of American homes and finally gave him something every struggling actor desperately wanted: steady work, national exposure, and a dependable paycheck. At last, Clint Eastwood was living the life of a successful television star. Yet the newfound fame came with another side, one that was much less flattering. As his popularity increased, stories began circulating about his behavior away from the cameras. Eastwood would eventually become known as a disciplined and efficient filmmaker, famous for working quickly and avoiding unnecessary takes. But during his younger years on television, some people remembered a very different Clint. According to accounts from the period, Eastwood developed a reputation for arriving late and sometimes appearing uninterested in the routine of television production. Crew members allegedly learned that scheduling his scenes later in the day could save everyone the frustration of standing around waiting for him. The young actor who had once struggled desperately to get noticed now had enough security to behave as though the production could wait for him. There was another reason his attention might have been elsewhere. Eastwood had married his first wife, Maggie Johnson, in 1953, long before he became one of Hollywood's biggest stars. But marriage apparently did little to stop his interest in other women. Stories of Eastwood's infidelities would follow him for decades, and some biographical accounts suggest that cheating was already part of his life during the early years of the marriage. As Eastwood became more famous, he apparently became less discreet. People working around him reportedly noticed women visiting his trailer on set. He would disappear inside, then emerge later looking exhausted and considerably less enthusiastic about getting back to work. It did not require much imagination for members of the crew to guess what had been happening. For some of the women, the encounters were brief and quickly forgotten. Eastwood was young, handsome, increasingly famous, and surrounded by opportunity. But not every relationship remained casual. At least one affair during this period developed into something much more serious, adding another layer of secrecy to a marriage that was already far more complicated than the public realized. And this pattern would become one of the defining contradictions of Clint Eastwood's personal life. On screen, he increasingly projected control. His characters were quiet, disciplined, and almost impossible to read. In private, however, his romantic life was becoming remarkably tangled. Relationships overlapped. Secrets accumulated. Women entered and disappeared from his life while the public remained largely unaware of what was happening. Years later, that ability to keep his private world hidden would become crucial when Eastwood entered into his most controversial relationship of all. Her name was Sondra Locke. What began as a passionate Hollywood romance would last for years, produce several movies, and convince Locke that she and Eastwood had built a life together. But underneath that relationship were decisions, secrets, and resentments that would eventually explode in court. By the time Locke discovered what she believed Clint had been doing behind her back, their love story had already turned into a bitter war. And when the legal battle finally appeared to be over, Locke believed Eastwood had one final move waiting for her, one that she would later describe as an even deeper betrayal than the breakup itself. Roxanne Tunis was a stuntwoman working on Rawhide when she crossed paths with Clint Eastwood. What might have begun as another casual attraction quickly became something much more serious. Their affair continued for years, and before long, it was hardly a secret to the people working around them. On set, cast and crew reportedly knew what was happening, which made the situation increasingly difficult to conceal. Then, in 1964, the relationship produced something that could not simply be dismissed as another backstage romance. Tunis gave birth to a daughter, Kimber. By that point, Eastwood was becoming increasingly frustrated with Rawhide. The show had made him famous, but he was tired of Rowdy Yates and eager to prove he could do more than play the handsome young cowboy. Meanwhile, some of his co-stars were beginning to receive film offers. That was how Eastwood first heard about an unusual Western being planned far from Hollywood, with much of the production taking place in Spain. The project did not exactly sound prestigious. It was being directed by a relatively unknown Italian filmmaker named Sergio Leone, and the lead role had initially been offered to Eastwood's Rawhide co-star Eric Fleming. Fleming reportedly had little interest in the project. Eastwood, however, saw an opportunity. For 11 weeks of work, Eastwood was paid around $15,000 to star in the movie that eventually became a fistful of dollars. As an additional bonus, he received a Mercedes-Benz. It was not the sort of production most Hollywood actors were desperate to join. The budget was modest, the director was unfamiliar to American audiences, and the entire concept of an Italian-made Western seemed strange. But Eastwood liked the role. For years, he had been stuck playing the clean-cut, youthful Rowdy Yates. In Leone's film, he finally got the chance to become something darker. His character was quiet, dangerous, morally ambiguous, and almost impossible to read. Eastwood stripped away unnecessary dialogue, reduced his expressions, and allowed his presence to do most of the work. The result was the beginning of the screen persona that would eventually make him an international icon. At first, nobody could have known how important the film would become. Eastwood himself probably never imagined that this strange little Western shot in Europe would redefine his career. But a fistful of dollars was followed by For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Together, the three films transformed both Eastwood and the Western genre. It took time for the movies to make their full impact in the United States, but when they did, audiences saw Clint Eastwood in an entirely new way. By the end of the 1960s, Rowdy Yates was becoming a distant memory. Eastwood had become the mysterious gunfighter with the poncho, the cigar, and the lethal stare. Then came Dirty Harry. If the Leone Westerns had turned Eastwood into a movie star, Harry Callahan turned him into Clint Eastwood as the public would remember him. The charming television cowboy was gone. In his place stood a hard, uncompromising screen presence whose image would follow him for the rest of his career. His professional life had changed completely, and for a while, it appeared that his marriage might change as well. Maggie Johnson had already endured years of Clint's affairs. Their marriage had been strained enough that the couple separated for a period, but after Eastwood's success in the spaghetti westerns, they attempted to rebuild their relationship. They decided to start a family, and in 1968, Maggie gave birth to their son Kyle, 15 years after the couple had first married. Their daughter Allison arrived in 1972. From the outside, the Eastwoods could almost have appeared like a traditional Hollywood family. But the old problems had never really disappeared. Even while Maggie was raising their children, Clint continued to speak about marriage in ways that suggested exclusivity was not exactly part of his philosophy. In a 1971 interview, Eastwood described his marriage in terms that suggested a degree of openness. Whatever label he placed on it, the reality was simpler. Marriage had never prevented him from pursuing other women. Maggie had tolerated that behavior for years. Perhaps she convinced herself that the affairs meant little, temporary distractions that would eventually disappear while she remained his wife. For a long time, that arrangement appeared to survive. Then Sondra Locke entered his life. This time was different. Locke was a young actress whose career had already attracted attention, and sometime in the early 1970s, she and Eastwood became involved. The exact timeline has always been difficult to pin down, but by 1975, there was little ambiguity left. Eastwood and Locke were living together. Eastwood reportedly told her that although he was still legally married to Maggie, the marriage was effectively over. Locke believed him. The beginning of their relationship was intense. Years later, Locke described those early days as a period of extraordinary closeness and passion. In her memoir, she recalled Eastwood telling her that he had never been faithful to one woman because, until meeting her, he had never truly been in love. For Locke, those words must have carried enormous weight. Eastwood had spent years moving from one woman to another, rarely allowing any relationship to interfere with the others. Yet now he seemed to be saying that Locke was different, that she had succeeded where everyone else had failed. At first, Locke moved into the Sherman Oaks home Eastwood had purchased with Maggie. Technically, Clint and Maggie were still husband and wife. Maggie had relocated to the family's property in Pebble Beach, but Locke never felt entirely comfortable living in the Sherman Oaks house. To her, it still belonged to another woman. Every room seemed to carry reminders that Eastwood had built a life there with his wife long before Locke arrived. Eventually, Clint and Sondra moved elsewhere, but changing houses could not remove Maggie Johnson from their relationship. She was still Clint's wife. And Maggie had begun to understand that Sondra Locke was not simply another affair. For years, she had apparently endured the women who came and went because none of them threatened her position permanently. Locke did. She was living with Eastwood. She worked with him. She occupied a place in his daily life that the other women had not. Maggie's resentment became impossible to ignore. She reportedly imposed strict boundaries regarding Locke's contact with the Eastwood children. Locke was also forbidden from entering the family property in Pebble Beach. Whatever tolerance Maggie once had for her husband's casual affairs did not extend to the woman who now appeared to be replacing her. In 1978, after 25 years of marriage, Maggie Johnson filed for legal separation. The marriage would take years to fully unwind. When the divorce was eventually finalized, reports placed Maggie's settlement somewhere in the range of $25 million to $30 million. After decades of infidelity, separation, reconciliation, and humiliation, one of Hollywood's longest-running complicated marriages was finally over. But there was another unusual detail in Eastwood and Locke's relationship. Throughout the years she lived with Clint, Sondra Locke was technically married too. Her husband was Gordon Anderson, a man she had known since childhood and regarded as one of her closest friends. Their marriage was unconventional from the beginning. Anderson was gay, and according to Locke, their relationship was based on deep friendship rather than romance. At the time they married, living together as unmarried friends would have attracted unwanted attention, so marriage offered them a socially acceptable explanation. Eastwood knew about the arrangement. He apparently accepted it completely and even purchased a home in West Hollywood where Anderson could live. For Clint and Sondra, legal documents supposedly did not define a relationship. They repeatedly suggested that they did not need marriage certificates to prove what they meant to each other. At the time, that philosophy may have sounded romantic. Years later, it would look very different. Without a marriage license connecting Eastwood and Locke, their relationship depended almost entirely on trust that they considered themselves partners even if the law did not. And Locke seemed to believe that trust completely. Even people close to Eastwood could see that his feelings for her appeared unusually intense. This was not simply another actress passing through his life. For years, Sondra Locke became his companion, his co-star, and one of the most important women in his world. But the same man who had spent his entire adult life keeping relationships overlapping and secrets compartmentalized had not suddenly become simple. And while Locke believed she had finally become the woman Clint Eastwood could remain faithful to, there were already signs that history was preparing to repeat itself. According to Eastwood's longtime friend and producer Fritz Maynes, Clint was deeply attached to Sondra Locke for several years, particularly from the mid-1970s into the early 1980s. But with Clint Eastwood, devotion did not necessarily mean exclusivity. Locke may have occupied the most important place in his life, yet that apparently did not stop him from maintaining other relationships on the side. For most people, that contradiction would have been impossible to reconcile. For Eastwood, it seemed to be simply another part of the way he lived. Fritz Maynes understood that better than most. He had been one of Eastwood's closest friends and collaborators for years, producing several of his films and standing beside him as Eastwood's power in Hollywood continued to grow. Their friendship seemed strong enough to survive almost anything. Until suddenly, it didn't. While the two were working on Heartbreak Ridge, Maynes learned that his long partnership with Eastwood was over through a telephone call from Eastwood's secretary. After years of friendship and professional collaboration, Eastwood reportedly did not even tell him personally that he was finished. It was a surprisingly cold ending to a relationship that had lasted decades. And Sondra Locke would eventually discover just how quickly Eastwood could cut someone out of his life when he decided a relationship was over. The first serious tension between Locke and Eastwood reportedly appeared after Maggie Johnson finally moved toward ending her marriage to Clint. With his wife leaving the picture, Eastwood apparently began discussing marriage with Locke. On the surface, it seemed like the moment Sondra had been waiting for. There was only one problem. Locke did not want to divorce Gordon Anderson. Her marriage to Anderson had never been conventional, but the bond between them was real. They had known each other since childhood and remained extremely close. Locke may have loved Eastwood, but she also understood his history. This was a man who had spent decades moving between women, affairs, and overlapping relationships. Marrying Clint Eastwood required a level of faith that Locke was not certain she possessed. She had already watched how he treated Maggie. She knew about the other women. She understood better than almost anyone how difficult it was for Eastwood to remain committed in the traditional sense. So she hesitated. And over time, the passionate relationship that had once seemed almost indestructible began to deteriorate. Locke later described years of emotional turmoil and growing frustration. Whatever affection remained between them was increasingly buried beneath resentment, arguments, and mistrust. By 1989, after more than a decade together, she finally decided she had reached her limit. The relationship ended. Because Eastwood and Locke had never married, there was no divorce proceeding and no straightforward division of property. They could theoretically have walked away from each other and moved on with their separate lives. That is not what happened. The breakup quickly became one of the ugliest personal battles of Eastwood's life. While her relationship with Clint was collapsing, Locke had been working hard to establish an identity that did not depend on being Eastwood's partner or co-star. She had already built a respected acting career, but she was also moving behind the camera. At a time when female directors were still extremely rare in Hollywood, Locke was directing movies of her own. After separating from Eastwood, she began work on her second feature as a director, Impulse. Professionally, it should have represented an important new chapter. Then she came home from work one day and discovered something extraordinary. The locks on the house had been changed. Her belongings were gone. According to Locke, Eastwood had arranged for her possessions to be packed up and placed into storage while she was away filming. Whatever hope remained for an amicable breakup disappeared instantly. Locke went to court. She filed a palimony lawsuit against Eastwood, essentially arguing that after years of living together as a committed couple, she deserved financial recognition similar to what might have resulted from a divorce. Eastwood fought back. One of the most humiliating parts of the dispute came when his side characterized Locke as little more than a roommate rather than a long-term domestic partner. After more than a decade of living together, making films together, traveling together, and presenting themselves publicly as a couple, Locke now had to listen as the legal battle reduced their relationship to something almost casual. The fight dragged on for more than a year. Then, in the middle of everything, Locke received news far more frightening than anything happening in court. She had breast cancer. Suddenly, the legal war with Eastwood was no longer the only battle in her life. Locke underwent treatment while simultaneously dealing with the emotional and financial strain of the lawsuit. The experience left her exhausted, and eventually she decided to settle. On paper, the agreement appeared substantial. Locke reportedly received money up front, continued financial payments, and perhaps most importantly for her future career, a development and directing arrangement with Warner Brothers. For a woman determined to establish herself as a filmmaker, the Warner Brothers deal could have been more valuable than almost anything else. It seemed as though Locke had survived one of the most painful periods of her life and emerged with an opportunity to start again. But according to Locke, that opportunity was not what it appeared to be. Although Warner Brothers accepted projects from her under the agreement, none of them ultimately became films. Locke eventually came to believe that the deal had never been intended to create a genuine directing career for her. She suspected something darker. Locke later alleged that Eastwood had secretly helped arrange the Warner Brothers agreement as a way to settle the palimony case while ensuring that her proposed films would never actually move forward. She claimed that what looked like a valuable career opportunity had effectively been worthless from the beginning. If true, it meant the settlement that convinced her to abandon her lawsuit had contained a devastating hidden catch. And Locke was not prepared to let it go. The breakup that had started with changed locks and packed boxes would eventually lead to yet another legal confrontation between the former couple, this time centered on whether Eastwood had interfered with her career. While Sondra Locke was fighting to rebuild her professional life, Eastwood had already begun another significant relationship. The next woman was actress Frances Fisher. Eastwood and Fisher first became close while working together on Pink Cadillac. Their relationship began before the conflict with Locke had completely disappeared from Eastwood's life, continuing the familiar pattern of one romance beginning while another chapter was still unfinished. By around 1990, Eastwood and Fisher were appearing publicly as a couple. For Fisher, the relationship initially felt extraordinary. She later recalled believing she had finally found the great love of her life. Eastwood could be charming, powerful, attentive, and intensely charismatic. It was easy to understand why women repeatedly believed that this time might be different. But Fisher eventually came to a painful realization. She was not the first woman to feel that way. In hindsight, she suggested that many women who became involved with Eastwood probably believed they had discovered something unique with him. That illusion did not last forever. Eastwood and Fisher eventually had a daughter, Francesca. Her arrival represented a surprisingly significant moment in Eastwood's personal history. Reports have stated that Francesca's birth was the first time he was actually present for the birth of one of his children. For a while, Eastwood and Fisher appeared to have built something stable. They lasted roughly 5 years. But once again, the ending was complicated. Before Fisher had even fully moved out of Eastwood's home, another woman had entered the picture. Her name was Dina Ruiz. Ruiz was a television news anchor and was roughly 35 years younger than Eastwood. In a pattern that would have looked painfully familiar to the women before her, Eastwood began taking Ruiz to public events before his relationship with Fisher had been formally announced as finished. There was little ambiguity about where things were headed. In 1996, Clint Eastwood married Dina Ruiz. For a man whose romantic history was filled with affairs, separations, unconventional relationships, and explosive breakups, the marriage appeared surprisingly durable. Clint and Dina remained together for nearly 2 decades and had a daughter, Morgan. But even that relationship eventually fell apart. Once again, the man famous for playing characters who seemed almost impossible to shake had found himself at the center of another complicated romantic ending. What makes Eastwood's story even more remarkable is that all of this unfolded while his professional life continued at an almost unbelievable pace. While navigating marriages, affairs, children, lawsuits, and bitter breakups, Eastwood was simultaneously acting, producing, and directing some of the most successful films of his career. He evolved from Western star to action icon and then into one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers. He directed acclaimed movies, accumulated Academy Award victories and nominations, and continued reinventing himself long after most actors of his generation had slowed down. As if that were not enough, Eastwood even entered politics. In 1986, he was elected mayor of Carmel by the Sea, the small California community he had called home for years. The transformation was extraordinary. The young man who had once struggled through acting classes had become a television star. The television cowboy became an international movie icon. The movie icon became an Oscar-winning director. And somewhere between all of it, he managed to build one of the most complicated personal histories in Hollywood. But perhaps the strangest part of Clint Eastwood's story is how effectively he kept those two worlds separate. On screen and behind the camera, he became known for discipline, simplicity, and control. His private life was almost the exact opposite. It was filled with overlapping relationships, secret children, broken friendships, courtroom battles, and women who repeatedly believed they had finally become the one person capable of changing him. Some stayed for years. Some became mothers to his children. Some became his wives. And some, like Sondra Locke, eventually became his enemies. Yet through every scandal, breakup, and accusation, Clint Eastwood continued working. Movie after movie. Decade after decade. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. How could one man maintain such a chaotic private life while simultaneously building one of the longest and most successful careers Hollywood has ever seen? Whatever the answer is, Clint Eastwood has never been eager to reveal it. And after more than half a century of rumors, lawsuits, lovers, marriages, children, masterpieces, and controversies, there are still parts of his story that remain hidden behind the same expression audiences have been trying to read for decades. Thank you for joining me on this adventure. I hope you discovered something new and interesting today. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next destination. See you in the next journey.